Welcome back to A Story to Tell on the campus of Dixie State University. Today we're talking to Jeffrey Whipple. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you today?
Don't mind if I call you Jeff?
Not at all.
You're a candidate for something. What are you running for? The border?
No, I'm running for the United States House of Representatives from Utah's 2nd District.
And who are your opponents?
I'm running against Chris Stewart, whoever ends up being the winner of the Democratic State Convention, and then Jan Garbett from the United Utah Party.
Well, it sounds like an exciting race.
It should be.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you came from, what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I'm not quite a St. George native, but I've lived here almost 20 years, so
that's good enough.
Close enough. I'm actually a student here at Dixie State University, going back to school to try to improve my life a little bit, explore new things, learn new things. And one of the great things about me in reference to other candidates is that I'm an average person. You know, I'm not wealthy. I haven't spent my entire life in politics. I'm just a regular guy who understands what it means to live paycheck to paycheck and make tough choices.
You said you've been here 20 years. Where were you before that?
As a kid, I lived a couple different places around the country, moved around as Dad moved with work. Lived in Chicago, was born in the LA area. Came here in 1996, so actually a little more than 20 years.
Close enough.
Close enough.
For government work. What have you done for a living? You say you came back to school. What did you do before that?
I ran a pawn shop before that, and before that I worked in call center management and sales. So I've done some different and varied things with life. Haven't quite found where I want to be when I grow up, but I know I'd like to improve my community and help those around me, which is why I'm running for office.
You say you're a student. What are you studying? What's your goal there?
I'm finishing up a business degree right now. So I will actually graduate 2 weeks after this race occurs, after the election occurs, rather.
So you graduate this year?
Yes.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, on to bigger and better things, hopefully the U.S. House, but if not, I'm sure I'll find something to do.
That is bigger and better, the U.S. House?
I certainly think so.
It's a big house, I guess.
It is a lot of representatives, a lot of varied views.
But is it better?
It could be.
Could be.
It could be.
How
I'm not
will
sure
you
it is
make
right
it
now.
better?
Well, I have a lot of ideas on things that need to change in our country. You know, I look at the two parties that dominate politics right now, and I frankly see the same thing. I see two parties that are concerned with, at least on a national level, not to say members of these parties necessarily feel this way, but on a national level, I see two parties concerned with raising government, or raising the size of government, increasing the scope of government, and telling average citizens what to do with their daily lives. I think we need to stop that, and I think we need to scale back some of the interferences in our day-to-day lives that government has already presented to us.
What are some of those interferences that need scaling back?
Well, for one, the number of different types of taxes that we pay. I mean, I think I've paid 3 different types of taxes before I've gotten to this interview today. You know, we pay taxes on sales, taxes on gasoline, taxes on estates, capital gains, income, and the list goes on and on. We need a simpler tax system that taxes fewer things at an easier to understand rate.
Well, I hate to admit this, but we're planning a tax on the interviews.
Oh, you might have picked the wrong candidate then.
You know I'm just kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your family.
Well, I'm married, going on 6 years now. My wonderful wife named Valerie, and then I've got 2 little boys, Jeffrey and Patrick.
How did you meet Valerie?
You know, we actually met by chance. She worked in a retail store and helped me out behind the register one day. We got to talking. I convinced her to let me buy her dinner, and the rest is history.
So you did what you needed to do, I guess, huh?
I did.
How old are your boys?
They are 4 and 5.
4 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about them.
They take a lot of energy. They're, man, they are exhausting. And I guess I shouldn't complain because I've got to be honest, between school and running for office, my wife does more with them than I do, but they're little balls of energy that teach me a lot. You know, my youngest the other day, I watched him running on his way to preschool, and he tripped on some uneven concrete. And you know, he cried, he was upset, he needed a hug from Dad. But then, you know, just a minute later, you know, he stopped crying, dusted himself off, took off running again, doing the exact same thing, but he jumped over the uneven spot this time.
Oh, he's learning.
He's learning. He's learning. And, I wish that more people, myself included, could kind of have that attitude towards life, Pick yourself up, dust yourself off. Don't make the same mistake, but don't let making a mistake or a setback deter you.
Or if you do make it again, don't tell anybody.
Exactly. Destroy all evidence that you tried.
Well, you've got a formidable opponent.
I do. He's a 4-term now incumbent. Won the Republican convention over the weekend by a landslide. I like a lot of third-party candidates, I realize that I'm not going to win this election. My goal is to just raise the notion in people's mind that there's more than 2 choices, and that the only really wasted vote is a vote for a candidate that you don't support. I know you hear arguments all the time from the 2 major parties that a vote for a third-party candidate is essentially throwing away your vote, because since only they have a chance of winning, voting for anyone other than the 2 of them just takes away a vote that they legitimately earned. And I flatly reject that notion. Third-party candidates aren't a waste. The only waste is not voting.
I was just going to ask you that. That's where you really waste.
Exactly. And half of the people in this state and in this country didn't vote in our last presidential election.
Even more than that don't vote.
Yeah. I mean, we have a sitting president right now who was elected and put into office with, I think it was 26% of eligible voters supporting him. If we don't like the choices in government, we have an opportunity to fix them. We just need more people to take advantage of it.
You mentioned taxes. Are there any taxes that are okay?
There are. And I differ from some libertarians there. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that taxation is theft, but I think that it shares enough characteristics with theft that
close enough.
It's close enough, really. It is, because think about what happens to you if you don't pay your taxes. Men with guns are eventually going to come and take you to jail. You don't have a choice in the matter. And I'm okay with that, but we need to be more careful in the way that we administer them, realizing that it is one small step away from being theft. We've got to be very careful in the amount of money that we take from people.
Other than the taxes, what about the other aspects of the management of government? Could that be made better?
Well, it could always be more streamlined. I think that we need to take some lessons from the private sector and let people who are experts do their thing in a lot of respects. Government could be sped up. It could be more efficient. That might not be a good thing, though. We need to have a deliberative process in government. Once a decision has been made, we need to execute it in the most efficient way possible, which we clearly don't do now. But we also need to, I think, more so than we do now, have deliberation before a decision is made. I mean, this latest spending bill is a great example of something that was passed in a time when it would have been impossible for somebody to read the whole thing. In the time between when our representatives were given a copy of the bill and when they had to vote on it. It was something, and I may be wrong in the exact numbers here, but a 2,500-page bill that these guys had less than 18 hours to read. We need to slow that part of government down and speed it up once we make a decision. We're doing it backwards now.
One of the big questions here in the South is the Lake Powell pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're not directly connected to that, other than the fact that I would guess that maybe there's going to need to be a lot of out of the area funding.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the pipeline?
That's not an issue that, because it's not a direct federal issue, I haven't studied it in enough depth to have a formal position. In general, public works, though, is one of the few things that I think government should be involved in. So if it's something that we deem necessary, I'm all for it, but I'm not informed enough on that particular issue to have a solid opinion.
What about the land grab issue, the federal lands?
Well, the federal government controls entirely too much land in Utah. Entirely too much, between national monuments, BLM land, national forests, etc. I'm not going to suggest that we shouldn't have any kind of public land, but the fact that the federal government controls 2/3 of the land in Utah seems like an obscene overreach to me. a significant amount of that land needs to be returned back to control of the residents of this state or sold off to private individuals or enterprise.
Tell me about your wife.
Tell me about my wife. Well, she's a fun lady. She supports me.
I was going to ask
everything
about
I
her
do.
support for you for running.
She supports me, I think, with the understanding that I'm not going to win.
She doesn't want to move to Washington?
No, I don't think she wants to do that.
Where is she from?
She was a military dependent growing up, so she's from
Everywhere?
all over the place. She was born in New Hampshire, went to high school in Germany, middle school in Mississippi, and more that I can't remember right now.
You met her at a retail store here in town?
I met her actually, I lived in Provo for a couple of years.
Provo? Mm-hmm. Isn't that where the mental institution is?
It is actually, or at least it used to be. That's actually a fun museum.
You met her in Provo. What were you doing in Provo?
I went to Utah Valley University for a few years. That's the one time when I've lived in Utah outside of St. George. I moved to the Wasatch Front for a few years. And given that I met her, if that's the only positive that comes out of it, it was definitely worth it.
What's her name again?
Valerie.
Valerie. Isn't that a famous name of some movie star?
Oh, I'm sure it is. We've got so many of them now.
And some that aren't so famous and some that are infamous.
True.
So the most important aspect of your campaign is taxes?
Taxes and spending.
Spending.
And also criminal justice, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But when it comes to taxes, I feel like we've kind of got it backwards. We announced tax cuts last year. Tax cuts for at least some people and for businesses. And now we've just passed one of the largest spending bills in American history. I'm all for tax cuts for everyone. We definitely pay way too much in taxes, but it's just irresponsible to cut taxes before you cut spending. So that's going to be the main focus for me, rather than cutting taxes directly and first. My goal is to advocate for policies such that spending is cut and that we can afford to give tax cuts. Because if we're going to spend the money, whether we tax it or not, eventually we're going to pay for it either way. And I'd rather pay for it up front than with debt.
Okay, you mentioned criminal justice.
I did. There are a couple of things with regard to criminal justice that I think need to change.
Only a couple?
Well,
that's a good start, I guess.
A couple that I think are realistic. There's a lot that needs to change. One of the problems when you have a system that is, well, frankly, it's broken. Our criminal justice system is broken.
In what way is it broken?
We've got racial and class-based bias that I think is a lot more rampant than gets credit for. We have a misalignment of priorities when it comes to offender sentencing. I mean, the sentence for growing a couple of marijuana plants versus the sentence for rape. I think in our heads, we all know which one is a more severe crime. But if you look at sentencing guidelines, it doesn't come off that way.
Are they the same?
No. Actually, growing marijuana plants is, in general, not always, but in general, going to result in a more severe sentence.
Than rape?
Yeah. And the Brock Turner case from a few years ago is a great example of that. Guy was convicted of rape, got 6 months, was out in 3. If you're caught with a relatively small amount of marijuana in some states, you're looking at a mandatory minimum of 5 years.
What's the reason for that?
Misaligned thinking. I think that people.
But what are they trying to accomplish?
I wish
Is
that
it
I could.
Prejudice, a bias, or is it something they're trying to accomplish?
I think deep down there is some sort of prejudice. I'm not going to try to ascribe some sort of motive or malice to the people who wrote those laws.
Go ahead.
But they got it wrong. They did. And mandatory minimum sentences, especially for drug crimes, but across the board, I think mandatory minimum sentences are something that need to go away.
Should be left up to the judge.
It should. That's why we have judges. If we're going to have mandatory minimums, we might as well replace them with a spreadsheet. We need to have judges and let judges judge cases on a case-by-case basis. And I'm also of the mind that drug possession, now not drug distribution, not necessarily drug manufacturing, but drug possession in and of itself, needs to be decriminalized entirely. Locking up the end user doesn't help anybody. It costs us billions of dollars a year, and it ruins lives that don't need to be ruined.
Well, that's nice. So that should be done from the federal level, not the state level?
It should. Now, if states choose to have laws at a state level, that's something that's their prerogative. That was granted them by the Constitution. Each state can govern itself in its own way. But at the federal level, absolutely, drug prohibition needs to end. I just think that's common sense, especially from the end user level. I mean, drug addiction is a disease. It's tragic. It ruins lives. And I'm not at all trying to suggest that it doesn't. But we need to treat it like the medical condition that it is and not put people in prison for it. I mean, again, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I was watching TV the other day, and the same thought came to me that maybe we're not evaluating or understanding a lot of the problems of society in the criminal justice system.
We're not. And I think we have a history in this country of approaching criminal justice from the perspective of trying to regulate morality. And I don't think that's the appropriate stance to take. You know, as a libertarian, I'm a firm believer that if you're not hurting someone else or taking somebody else's stuff, you're probably not committing a crime. I mean, you're definitely not committing a crime. If there's no readily identifiable victim, how can you really argue that a crime's been committed? But we have all sorts of crimes across this country where the victim is society, or we're trying to protect people from themselves. You know, recent efforts to tax or ban certain sizes of sodas in some states and cities.
Do they do that?
It's been proposed. It's not been passed into law, but it's been a serious proposal by serious people. Fortunately, not here.
Give me an example.
In 2000, I want to say 13, Michael Bloomberg proposed banning sodas above...
in New York?
In
right?
New York, yeah. I want to say above 32 ounces, and I may be wrong there. I don't have the
What was the
specifics.
reason for that?
Well, I mean, soda's bad for you. I mean, that's kind of an objective fact. If you drink too much soda, it's going to have negative health consequences. And so in his view, it was government's duty to protect people.
You mean government shouldn't control people?
Absolutely not, no. And that's what the Libertarian Party is all about. You know, we're not the party of no government, like some of our critics will tell you. We're the party of minimum government. That government, again, if you're not hurting somebody else, there's not really a reason for government to get involved in your life.
Who do you admire that's a famous libertarian?
It's a famous libertarian. Well, there are sadly few famous libertarians.
Well, some infamous ones then.
You know, I'm actually a big fan of the Libertarian presidential candidate from 2012 and 2016, Gary Johnson. You know, he ran on a platform, again, of not no government, like some libertarians believe, but a platform of minimum government, and also a platform of measured and paced change. You know, radical change is good for no one. I'm a believer that we need to move in the right direction, but that trying to get there overnight is going to cause more problems than it solves.
He was the governor of New Mexico?
He was.
I know a little bit about him.
Yeah. I'm impressed. A lot of people don't.
I've heard of him. Rand Paul, isn't he kind of libertarian?
He is. He's a libertarian a lot of the time. And I got to say, I'm a big fan of his as well, most of the time. And that, I think he demonstrates part of the problem with a two-party system. Because at the end of the day, no matter what your individual ideological beliefs are, if you're an elected official, you're either a Republican or a Democrat. And those parties can exert an enormous amount of pressure on you to vote their way when the chips are down. So I think that we need to, as a people, move away from that one or the other paradigm. Even if it's just a 3 or 4 choices, that'll force people in government to talk to each other. It'll force them to negotiate and compromise. Because right now we're not seeing a lot of that. We're seeing, we've got my way, you've got your way,
And the right
and that's
way.
it. Yeah.
Your way, my way, and the right way.
Yeah, something like that.
Should the parties be abolished?
I think parties are an inevitability of politics. I mean, I'm a realist in that regard. In a perfect world, I don't think there would be a need for political parties, but they're going to exist no matter what we really try to do with them.
Some of the founders of the country, or one of them, and I've forgotten who it was, said that the party system would be the death of America.
I believe that was Mr. Franklin, and I got to say, our current state of politics is kind of proving him right. I mean, parties are inevitable, but large parties are damaging. And even within parties, you've got a wide spectrum of ideology. I look at the Republicans, I look at the Democrats, and at least in my mind, I see 3 different groups inside of each party.
At least 6.
Yeah. You see a whole bunch of different groups that are all fighting amongst themselves rather than trying to spin off into separate entities and argue for their positions that way.
We ought to listen to each other rather than fight each other.
Absolutely.
Evaluate the situation.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that bothers me, and I don't come down on either side of it, is you talk about the criminal justice system, the number of people that are killed by police officers. You have a comment on that?
I do actually. It's an astonishingly high number, and I think there are things that we can do to fix it. For starters, I think that enhanced training for police officers is a great way to start. I mean, if you step back and think about it, we're asking these people to do an incredibly difficult job. I mean, they're part lawyer, part soldier, part psychiatrist, part social worker, and we're expecting them to do this with less than a year of formal training.
And they need to be part humanitarian.
They do. They absolutely do. And the brevity of their initial training, I think, it limits what they're able to do. We've seen examples. I know the Salt Lake City Police went several years without any officer-involved shootings.
There have been several lately.
There have been. They've sadly, that trend has been broken in the last year or so. But they went several years, and they credited that to better conflict resolution training, better de-escalation of force training, and I think that's something we need across the board. There are far too many unarmed people killed at the hands of police.
We started talking a little bit about your wife, and I got you off the subject. Tell me a little bit more about her.
A little bit more about
What does
her.
she do?
She is a stay-at-home mom right now. She raises our boys. She does a fantastic job with them, molding them into good little people. That's what I'm finding is the best part about being a parent is watching them become, rather than the little crying lumps they start out as babies, watching them become little people, little individuals with tastes and preferences and personalities, and she's helping to guide that. And I applaud her for it because she's a lot better at it than I am.
Are you a full-time student here?
I am right now, yeah.
You're graduating
at the end of the next semester in fall of 2018.
Okay.
So should I, by some strange quirk, win this election, I will have graduated before I take office.
Well, that'll be fun. Have you ever met Chris Stewart?
Once for about 3.5 seconds many years ago. So
What
I
was the
doubt he'd
occasion?
remember me. It was at some sort of, I want to say it was a town hall meeting here. He came here and gave a speech to a group of people years and years ago. And afterwards he stayed for a few minutes to greet voters and constituents. And I shook his hand, said hello. Not much more than that.
Well, tell me about your parents.
My parents, okay. They're both St. George residents. My mother actually works at Dixie State University. My father has been on disability for nearly 30 years now as the result of a drunk driver. And their good influence molded me into the person I am today. At least I think it's good influence.
Well, you seem like a very nice guy.
I hope so. I hope so. That's.
You politicians can fool people, though.
Well, I don't think I'm a politician quite yet.
You're looking forward to it, though.
I am. You know, that's something that maybe someday.
We've got 2.5 minutes left in the interview. What's your final words?
My final words. You know, I would hope that people watching this would at least look a little bit further into my platform, look at the Libertarian Party platform, and if you're dissatisfied with the Republicans or the Democrats, and I'm not going to list the reasons to be dissatisfied with either, because there are plenty of them, but take a look at libertarianism. Take a look at even the Green Party, the United Utah Party. There are other options. Now, I think I bring the best one to the table, obviously, but a vote for me or a vote for a third-party candidate is more than a vote for me or for that candidate. It's a vote against the two-party oligarchy that exists today. And that's the strongest message that we can send to our elected officials and politicians is with our vote.
Is that we're not happy with what's going on?
Exactly. And that's the best way to influence politicians and affect change, is to take away the one thing that they absolutely need from us, which is our vote.
1 minute left. What is the first thing you would do if you're elected?
The first thing that I would do if I was elected is probably pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming. And then after that, I would introduce a bill into Congress to decriminalize and legalize marijuana at the federal level, and work with my colleagues to decriminalize all drugs in the same fashion, and allow states to make their own decisions regarding their use.
Well, the rumors I hear in Utah, that may be on the agenda in the legislature here.
So there is the medical cannabis initiative that's going to be on the ballot in November. I would encourage everyone to strongly investigate and look into that. But what I'm talking about goes a little bit further than strict medical use. It would allow states the freedom to make their own rules across the board, whether it's for recreational use, medical use, etc.
Well, Jeffrey, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Been our pleasure. This is Lane Ronald from the campus of Dixie State University. We've been talking to a Congressional District 2 candidate, Libertarian Jeffrey Whipple. Thank you for being with us on A Story to Tell.